So this is going to be my Doctor Who Iceberg video. So this isn't really what I normally do. I normally make kind of art films and documentary stuff. But I've found with COVID and everything, it's a little bit difficult to have any creativity. And so I thought I would do this just as something to get the kind of creative juices flowing. So if you're someone who follows me normally, it might not be for you, but I hope that you like it anyway. And if you're someone who likes Doctor Who and you watch this, maybe you could go over to my regular channel and have a little look around. I'm guessing everyone knows what an iceberg is. So you start at the top with the least obscure things, and then as it goes down you get more and more obscure. And there's been this kind of trend on YouTube of making videos where you explain what every single one of the items on the iceberg is. This iceberg was made by a Reddit poster called Dr. Vesuvius. I'm just gonna say at the start that there are a couple of things I'm gonna skip on here just because I'm assuming that if you're watching this video you have a kind of basic understanding of what Doctor Who is and who the characters are, so there's a lot of stuff near the top that's so well known that it's really not worth bringing up. Also, I will say at the start that there are a few things on here that I like to think of myself as someone who knows a lot about Doctor Who. I haven't seen everything. There's some BBV productions that I haven't seen, and I haven't read all the spin-off stuff, especially we'll realise that when we get to stuff like Faction Paradox, that my knowledge there is somewhat limited. But I'll do my best, and anything that I don't know about, I'm trying to work from the TARDIS wiki, which I've linked here, so if I don't explain it properly, you can look on there and it'll probably have a bit more information. So let's get started. This is a repeated phrase that characters say when they entered the TARDIS. In this supercut, linked here, it seems that the first person to say it is Joe Grant. I mean, there might be more because this supercut only includes episodes that exist. Maybe it's in a missing episode. But it's probably on here as a joke reference to the iceberg being more than meets the eye. Everyone knows who David Tennant is. I just find it funny because he's at the top, and currently the 10th Doctor is the king of spin-off media. He's actually appears in more stuff than Jodie Whittaker does. I mean, if you only looked at spin-off stuff, you might think he was the current Doctor. This is a pedantic complaint that people make to non-fans when they make the mistake of calling the title character the name of the show. We'll come back to this. A catchphrase of the Doctor in several Stephen Moffat scripts, most notably Blink and Day of the Doctor. Everyone disagrees about whether Clara Oswald is a good or bad character. I think more people dislike her than like her, but the people who like her love her, and some actually prefer her new fan adventures to those of the Doctor themselves. Everyone knows who Wilf is as well, but I thought it was funny that they put him just after Clara. He is the least controversial character of the show. Everyone loves Wilf. A criminal family from the planet Raxacoricophalopatorius. They appear twice on the main show, but they recur as villains throughout the more kind of kid-friendly spin-off show, The Sarah Jane Adventures. Jenny is sort of the Doctor's daughter through a cloning/DNA extraction machine. She's played by Georgia Moffat, who's Peter Davison's actual daughter and David Tennant's actual wife, which is a bit odd. She only appears in one episode, but she's come back in audios and comics. A Time Lord has 13 lives, meaning they can regenerate 12 times, but it's possible for them to be given a new set of regenerations, something that's happened to both the Doctor and the Master, so the writers can basically just get around this when they need to. A renegade Time Lord, just like the Doctor or the Master, her thing is that she's a calculating and amoral scientist, and that she once dressed up like Bonnie Langford's Mel. She only appears in 2 or 3 stories, depending on if you count Dimensions in Time. But every time a mysterious woman is shown in adverts for a new season, all the fans think it'll be her. And it never is. This is a prequel minisode to Day of the Doctor. It's most notable for the surprise return of Paul McGann as the 8th Doctor to the main live-action show after 17 years of only spin-off appearances, and for showing his regeneration into John Hurt's War Doctor. The Valeyard's an amalgam of all the Doctor's evil qualities, drawn by the Time Lords from some point between the Doctor's 12th and final regeneration. That's about as specific as it really gets, and so there's different accounts in spin-off material as to what that vague statement actually means. Basically, he's an evil Doctor who can't regenerate, so he turns up quite a lot trying to steal the Doctor's lives in season 23 or multiple spin-off audios and books. Omega is one of the founders of Time Lord Society. They collapsed a star to make into a black hole, so that black hole could be used as a power source for time travel. While they were doing this, Omega got stuck in the singularity and now lives in an antimatter universe where he comes back from now and then to try and get revenge on the Time Lords for leaving him there. So there are multiple founders of Gallifrey, but there's kind of 3 main founders of Time Lord Society. There's Omega, there's Rassilon, the first president and the guy who gets his name on everything, and there's another whose name has been forgotten. They're called the Other, and the spin-off novels claim that thousands of years after their death, they were reincarnated as the Doctor. There are hints that the Doctor had a role in early Gallifreyan history in the Sylvester McCoy era, and this is often cited as part of the Cartmel master plan, named after Andrew Cartmel, who was the script editor at the time, to make the character more mysterious again, with the Other being this kind of end point. This is actually strangely similar to the new Timeless Child arc, except the Doctor isn't literally the Other. Instead he's a reincarnated or reloomed, we'll get back to that later, version, rather than like someone who's lived for billions of years. So, you know the Silurians? These are the aquatic cousins of them. The Guardians are pan-dimensional godlike beings who send normal folks like the Doctor and Turlough on missions, like getting a key to reset the order of the universe and hitting the Doctor with a big rock. The white and black Guardians stand for order and chaos, or good and evil, depending on who you listen to. There's also a hint that there's more Guardians in a lot of spin-off material, but that's never really been confirmed. This is a narrated storyboard showing an unfilmed scene where Amy and Rory's son goes to visit Rory's dad after the events of The Angels Take Manhattan. This was a kids show that ran during the 2nd and 3rd season of the new series, and it was sort of like a kids version of something like Talking Bad. It had competitions and quizzes and interviews and showed fan art. And it's mainly remembered now for a section where they showed part of an animated adventure featuring the 10th Doctor and Martha Jones. It's now been released on DVD as a whole story called The Infinite Quest, but the rest of the show has kind of, perhaps deliberately, been forgotten. These are the spin-off novels of the new series. They're generally standalone adventures that fit in between TV episodes featuring the current cast. Sutekh is the Egyptian god of death, who turned out to be an Osiran, trapped in a pyramid on Mars, and had a very sexy voice. Romana, or, this is a difficult one, Romana Voratra Lundar, is a time lady that travelled with the 4th Doctor, played by Lalla Ward, who's probably the most well-known version of the character. Lalla Ward and Tom Baker were shortly married in real life. In the show, Romana left to travel a pocket universe with K9, but basically all the spin-off material agrees that she came back to the main universe and became the president of Gallifrey. Target was a company that published a range of novelizations of classic Doctor Who stories from the 70s to the 90s. This was largely before home media such as VHS. These novelizations were often the only way for fans to re-experience the stories. The Target brand was purchased in the 1990s and ceased to exist, but recently BBC Books acquired the rights to publish under that name and have started releasing Target novelizations of the new series. I think this refers to the idea that the Doctor was given more regenerations in Time of the Doctor, and we aren't told how many that he got, so it could be infinite amounts. Between this Iceberg's creation and now, The Timeless Children was broadcast, so now we know that the Doctor is not really a Time Lord, but some kind of other regenerating alien who's lived for billions of years, so must have, if not infinite, a lot more than 13 lives. Class was a 2016 Doctor Who spin-off set in Coal Hill School, where a group of students and an alien teacher have to protect the Earth from threats that emerge through a crack in time that exists in the school. It's lower down on this iceberg because it failed to capture popularity with the public, or fans really, and remained largely unwatched and forgotten, possibly due to it being released originally on the newly online BBC Three streaming channel without much promotion. This was a 2008 tie-in web series where John Barrowman, in character as Captain Jack, explains the backstory of the villain or alien of that week's episode. More obscure than this, or at least I'd never heard of it, is that the series returned briefly as River Song's Monster Files during Series 5. Mr. Men is a line of British children's books with characters that personify emotions or personal traits, such as Mr. Happy, Mr. Strong, Mr. Mean, stuff like that. In 2017 and 2018, a special set based on each of the Doctors was released, featuring many well-known characters in cartoon form. Romana 1 is the first incarnation of Romana, played by Mary Tam. She's less well known due to having only stayed for one season and not appearing in much spin-off material, partly due to her untimely death at only 62. Big Finish is a company that since 1999 have produced ongoing audio dramas about all the Doctors except for the most recent, and all sorts of side characters. They also make audios about other classic British TV shows such as Blake Seven, Terrorhawks. This company currently hold the license to produce comics based on the show. They've had lines based on most of the Doctors, Torchwood, and special crossover events. The Monk appears in the William Hartnell era as a rival from the Doctor's home who has a TARDIS and likes to meddle in history for fun or personal benefit. Appearing both the Time Meddler and the Daleks' Master Plan, he's the show's first recurring antagonist rather than a species like the Daleks. At the time, the backstory of the Time Lords and Gallifrey hadn't been established, so it's not mentioned in the show, but in a lot of spin-off material, the Monk returns as a Time Lord with multiple regenerations played by different actors, including having been shown to have survived the Time War in a new series with Missy. This is a line from the 1996 TV movie with Paul McGann. The Doctor says this to distract a character, and throughout the film there are other references to him being half human. In the show it's never really been referred to before or afterwards, except for as an in-joke in Hellbent. Is the Doctor really half human then? Most fans ignore this, thinking it's a joke, or they use elaborate explanations about how the eye is actually Evelyn's wife, or he tricked the Master by becoming half-human using a chameleon arch. There was a brief period in the 90s and 2000s where the spin-off novels toyed with the idea, and hinted that the Doctor's parents were a Time Lord explorer named Ulysses and a human inventor, Penelope Gate. But with the Timeless Children arc, this seems like it's never going to be mentioned again. A projection of a Time Lord's future regeneration in humanoid form, able to interact with the physical world. It seems to exist almost as a premonition or a warning of their upcoming death. The only definitive appearance of a Watcher is in Legopolis, where an unspeaking white figure stalks and then helps the Doctor. But it's very similar to Choji in Planet of the Spiders, who first appears as an assistant to the Time Lord Kyampo Rinpoche, before Rinpoche regenerates into him. This is a story from Tom Baker's second season as the Doctor, where he and Sarah Jane Smith have to stop a Frankenstein-like resurrection of an ancient evil Time Lord, Morbius. It's notable for 3 reasons. 1 is it introduces Morbius, who turns up in a bunch of spin-off material. 2, it's set on Karn and introduces the Sisterhood of Karn, an ancient mystic cult of women who return in a lot of spin-off material, but also in the new series at the 8th Doctor's regeneration and in Season 9 working alongside the Doctor at first, but then later the Time Lords. And 3, this scene. The Doctor and Morbius have a mind battle that shows their previous lives. Several faces of the production staff are shown after William Hartnell, implying that they are lives earlier than the known First Doctor. Most fans pre-2020 kind of excuse this as Morbius's previous lives, but the Timeless Children has canonized these faces as real pre-Hartnell regenerations of the Doctor, in the same way that the Ruth Doctor is. This is an interactive mini-episode released immediately after the broadcast of the Christmas Invasion, where the viewer plays the role of the Doctor's companion. It could be accessed by pressing the red button on your TV remote, and actions such as picking which of the family were aliens or controlling the TARDIS were taken by pressing various remote buttons. Now it's able to be accessed on some DVD releases of the Christmas Invasion and on the BBC website. A reptilian species where a group of criminals of them came to Earth in the 17th century, experimented with the plague, and alongside the Fifth Doctor accidentally caused the Great Fire of London. The Doctor's nickname at the Time Lord Academy. Although when it's first mentioned, it's not really treated like a nickname, and it's kind of just used like it's his actual name. Atkinson is best known as Mr. Bean, although I far prefer him as Blackadder, another British comedy character. He appeared as the Doctor in the 1999 spoof The Curse of Fatal Death. This was written by Stephen Moffat and is a bit different from a lot of spoof shorts because it's 20 minutes long and because it was extremely popular, or at least advertised at the time. I remember it being on sale as a VHS in my local W. Smith as though it was a real story. In the story, after falling for his assistant and defeating the Master and the Daleks, Atkinson regenerates into Richard E. Grant, and then Jim Broadbent, and then Hugh Grant, and then finally Joanna Lumley. Several pieces of dialogue kind of imply that the First Doctor only has one heart, instead of just accepting that the two hearts idea was only introduced in 1970 and ignoring these. Some fans have tried to explain this by saying that a Time Lord only grows their second heart after their first regeneration. Awkwardly though, the second Doctor only seems to have one heart in the Wheel in Space, so this retcon complicates the mythos without actually answering all the questions. Alex McQueen is an actor who plays an audio-only version of the Master. He's extremely bald, extremely posh, and extremely camp. He seems to have taken a step back from the role in recent years, but since he recently was in the 50th anniversary of the Master special for Big Finish, Masterful, we might hear him again soon. A room in the TARDIS that's completely cut off from the outside universe. A completely calm space. Until Tegan chucked it into space. All that was left was the doors, which made a swanky coffin for the Doctor to be carried about in to help him get over his regeneration. The actor who plays Doctor Who, a human scientist who builds TARDIS, a space-time travel device, in 2 films from the 1960s, which are adaptations of the first 2 Dalek stories. But except for this pretty simplified backstory for the Doctor, these are actually fairly faithful to the originals, except they're in colour and with bigger budgets. Peter Cushing is also famous for appearing in many Hammer horror films, some of which are the basis for later Doctor Who stories and the general aesthetic of the Philip Hinchcliffe era. In the world of Doctor Who, it's kind of been implied that Cushing and these films actually exist, and were written by Ian and Barbara when they returned to London in 1965. Moffat was actually going to have these movies' posters appear in Day of the Doctor, but since the adaptations actually weren't made by the BBC, they were made by Amicus, they would have had to pay for the rights to use them, and the right price was too high. The Virgin New Adventures is a series of novels which were released following the end of the classic series in 1989. These were marketed and viewed by the writers and many fans as the official continuation of the Doctor's story. They begin featuring the Seventh Doctor and Ace, but Ace eventually leaves and other companions are introduced, which we'll come back to. A number of these novels were written by the writers of the classic series, but also many by the writers of the new series, including one by Russell T Davies, leading many people to view these novels as almost a missing link between the two eras of the show. They ended around the time of the TV movie, although some more with Benny were produced, we'll get back to that, when BBC Books wanted the Doctor Who license back to produce their own series of Eighth Doctor novels. The Eighth Doctor Adventures were a series of novels that followed in the tradition of the Virgin New Adventures as the official continuation of Doctor Who featuring the Eighth Doctor. These are perhaps not held in as high regard, but every month a new story featuring McGann's Doctor with new and varied companions and ongoing plots was released. When I was a child in the wilderness years between the two shows, I viewed these as the official continuation of Doctor Who. They've kind of been sidelined now as people prefer to talk about McGann's Return to the Audios by Big Finish, but those only really started in 2001, so for 5 years the Eighth Doctor Adventures were the continuing stories, and I think they deserve to be remembered. This is the opposite to the earlier nitpick. I think this refers to the show's occasional references that Doctor Who is actually the character's real name. Wotan, an all-knowing computer, calls him this. The second Doctor signs his name as Dr. von Wehr, Doctor Who in German, and Missy claims it's their real name. Also in the early comic adaptations of the show, the Doctor goes by Doctor Who as well. So if anyone ever challenges you with the first nitpick, bring these up and then we'll see who the fake fan is. So, according to the Virgin New Adventures, the Time Lords were cursed to not be able to naturally have children, and are instead woven by looms, basically meaning that they're artificially grown, coming out as fully formed adults. This is quite a big joke within the fandom for being a bit silly, but you can add it to the list of possible origins for the Doctor, along with half-human and timeless child and everything, that he was made in a giant wool mill. It's largely been ignored since then, with Moffat actually including multiple children on Gallifrey, including the Doctor himself. An attempted spin-off featuring K9 and Sarah Jane Smith, respectfully referred to as Company in the title, from 1980. Only a pilot was ever made where Sarah and K9 basically experienced the plot of Hot Fuzz. While the show never continued, it is canon as it explains how K9 was given to Sarah and can be seen as the inspiration for the far more successful Sarah Jane Adventures. Missy mentions how she's known the Doctor since they were a little girl. It's a fun, jokey reference that at the time contradicted canon, but we now know the Doctor was originally a little girl. And I'm calling it evidence for my theory that Sacha Dhawan's master comes before Missy, and that's how she knows. Koshi, I think that's how you say it, is the Master's birth name, or his loomed name, in spin-off material, which he gave up when he went evil. Bernice Surprise Summerfield, or Benny, is a human archaeologist from the 25th century who travelled with the Seventh Doctor in the Virgin New Adventures. She was the first original companion created for the novels, and when they lost their Doctor Who license, the series actually continued with novels with Benny as the main character. Later on, when Big Finish was set up, they weren't able to get the rights to make Doctor Who audios straight away, so they made a year of Bernice Summerfield audios, which were so well received that the BBC gave them the license to the main show. Benny, played on audio by Lisa Bowerman, has appeared in audios and novels ever since, with new adventures continuing to this day. She's probably the most beloved non-TV companion, becoming a fan favourite with her sarcastic, heavy drinking nature and her developing nature from being fresh out of uni to having children and so on. Irving Braxiatel is a Time Lord and heavily implied to be the Doctor's brother. He first appeared in the Virgin New Adventures and their accompanying range The Missing Adventures with past Doctors, but has spread throughout spin-off media, becoming a regular in the Bernice Summerfield and Gallifrey audios. There's a whole backstory about him being good or evil and having multiple timelines, but that seems to have been forgotten about without much resolution now. He runs a museum collection and is also a high-ranking Time Lord, serving briefly as the president. So, a lot of the 1960s episodes of Doctor Who were destroyed to free up space in the BBC archives before the idea of home video releases made them valuable again. Many have been returned, but 97 are still missing. Home recorded audio exists for all of these, but how do you make them a visual experience? More recently, the trend has been animation, but originally people synced up the audios with the story's telesnaps. These were photographs taken of the broadcast by a guy called John Cura as a visual record of the show. These were used later by fans to create basically slideshows of the missing episodes to see what the sets and actors, etc. looked like. A lot of fans find them difficult to watch or boring, so despite these being the official TV stories, many fans have never actually seen these stories. But I actually prefer them to the animations because I think they're more accurate to the aesthetic of the show than 21st century animation. This is another family of Raxacoricophalopatorians. A group of them appear in the Sarah Jane Adventure story The Gift. They look a bit orange. These are audio dramas produced by Big Finish set on Gallifrey. Originally they were more about the politics of the Time Lords, but they've turned into thriller and then adventure stories. The main cast includes Romana, Braxiatel, Leela, a warrior companion of the Doctor, and Narvin, speaking of which. Narvin is a Time Lord who stayed on Gallifrey and became the head of the CIA. No, not that one. The Celestial Intervention Agency. They're essentially the Time Lord version of the CIA though, like our CIA. And Narvin appears not only in the Gallifrey audios, but across many series, sending various characters on missions to preserve the timelines and other things to benefit Gallifrey. Romana 3 is a spin-off only version of the character. She originates in the BBC Books line as a darker version of the character who was preparing for a war that we'll mention later. She's described as looking like actress Louise Brooks. This can be connected to a possible future incarnation of Romana seen in the Big Finish Gallifrey series played by Juliet Landau. She appears twice, but in both of these occasions the Time Lord that leads to her existence is negated, so we don't really know if she'll ever really exist or not. A couple of Victorian investigators, Henry Gordon Jago is a theatre impersonario, and George Lightfoot is a pathologist. Their very different lives crossed because of the Fourth Doctor in a story that I've talked about elsewhere. The chemistry between their actors made them a fan favourite duo, and Big Finish produced a series of audios where they investigate mysteries, until the death of Trevor Baxter, who played Lightfoot. An animated webcast broadcast in 2003 is both a 40th anniversary treat and as the official continuation of Doctor Who. It features Richard E. Grant as the Doctor with his companions Alison Cheney, played by Sophie Okonedo, who returned to the show as Liz 10, and an android version of the Master, played by Derek Jacobi, who actually returned as the Canon Master. 2003 was also the year that the revised TV series was announced though, so the Schalke series was basically forgotten before it even got started. This is a typo of Eramem, a companion of the Fifth Doctor and Perry's. She was an Egyptian pharaoh who was written out of history when she left her time with the Doctor. She left the TARDIS to live as a queen on Peladon, a planet from the Pertwee era, but further, less official spin-offs have her being transported to Earth in the present day. These were very short video clips that preceded each episode of Season 2 of the new series. You would text the BBC and then be able to download the clip straight to your mobile phone. Most of them are just sort of creepy little skits with little new information, but it's a fun gimmick.